Hello, and welcome to Literary Lens, your window into the world of stories and timeless classics. Today, we begin an exciting journey into Kanthapura by Raja Rao, a landmark novel in Indian English literature. The novel Kanthapura explores several important themes, starting with Gandhian ideals and nonviolence, showing how truth, nonviolence, and moral courage influence ordinary people. Morthy teaches the villagers to resist oppression without using violence, emphasizing ethical action as a path to freedom. Another central theme is social awakening and reform, highlighting how education, awareness, and unity can challenge entrenched social hierarchies, such as caste discrimination and gender inequality. The role of women is also crucial. They contribute in silent yet powerful ways, with characters like Rangama symbolizing resilience, moral strength, and the importance of women in social reform. The novel further portrays the conflict between tradition and change, illustrating tension between conservative elders, landlords, and new ideas as villagers navigate fear and moral dilemmas during social and political transformation. Sacrifice and moral courage are highlighted as well, showing the cost of ethical action including hardships, social isolation, and personal loss, with courage expressed not only in defiance but in enduring suffering with dignity. Finally, the theme of community and unity is central, as Rao emphasizes that collective action and solidarity are essential for social change, and the movement succeeds because the village acts together, transcending individual fears. About the author, Raja Rao, 1908 to 2006, was one of the most prominent figures in Indian English literature, celebrated for his lyrical prose, philosophical depth, and blending of Indian storytelling traditions with English writing. Born in Shivamogga, Karnataka, he studied in India and France, gaining exposure to both Indian culture and Western literary traditions. His works often reflect Indian philosophy, spirituality, and social issues, bridging East and West. He is best known for novels like Kanthapura, 1938, which focuses on Gandhian influence in a South Indian village, The Serpent and the Rope, 1960, exploring metaphysics, spirituality, and the human quest for self-realization, and The Cat and Shakespeare, 1996, which blends modern life with philosophical themes. Raja Rao's writing is distinctive for its use of Indian idioms, rhythms, and mythological references, giving English a uniquely Indian flavor. He won multiple awards, including the Padma Bhushan and the Sahitya Academy Award, and is remembered as a pioneer who made Indian English literature both authentic and profound. Now we will discuss Kanthapura, Chapter 1. The story of Kanthapura begins in a small village tucked away in the hills of South India, surrounded by lush forests and flowing rivers. The narrator, an old Brahmin woman named Akchaka, speaks to us as though she were sitting by a fire, telling the tale of her beloved village to curious listeners. Her voice is filled with a warmth and pride as she describes Kanthapura, a place shaped like a cow's back, lying quietly by the river Himavati. The air smells of wet earth and incense, and every sound, from the ringing temple bell to the chatter of the marketplace, tells the rhythm of village life. For Akchaka and her people, Kanthapura is not just a village, it is the whole world. She takes us on a slow, loving tour through the lanes of Kanthapura. The houses are small and close together, the roofs are red-tiled, and smoke curls gently from every kitchen. The village is divided by caste, and Achaka explains this without bitterness, but with the simplicity of someone born into that system. The Brahmins live in the upper streets, the weavers in their own quarter, and the pariahs, the untouchables, far away at the edge of the village. The social order is strict and unquestioned. Everyone knows their place, and no one dares to cross the invisible lines drawn by centuries of custom. Religion rules every heart in Kanthapura. The goddess Kanchama, the protector of the village, is said to have once slain a demon to save her people. From that day, she became their guardian, the spirit who watches over their crops, their homes, and their fates. Her temple stands proudly at the center of the village, and every festival, every prayer, and every important event begins with her name. To the people of Kanthapura, faith is life itself. Yet behind this deep devotion lies a quiet ignorance of the world beyond their hills. They know little of cities, machines, or politics. The British government, which rules India, seems like a distant dream, something that happens in other places to other people. But change, Achaka hints, is slowly coming. In the distant cities, a holy man has risen, Mahatma Gandhi, whom people speak of as an incarnation of God. He talks of truth, nonviolence, and freedom. The old woman tells us how these new ideas travel like whispers, carried by traders, postmen, and pilgrims, until they reach even the sleepy corners of Kanthapura. People do not yet understand what freedom truly means, but the name of Gandhi begins to glow in their conversations, like the faint promise of dawn. Achaka also introduces us to the important families of the village. There are the Butts, the learned priests, the Patels, who own land, and the potters and weavers, who live simply by their trades. Among them lives a young Brahmin named Morthy, who will soon become the heart of the story. Achaka speaks fondly of him, educated, kind, and full of courage. He went away to the city for his studies, and when he returned, he was no longer quite the same. He had heard Gandhi speak. He had read about justice, equality, and the need to free India from the chains of foreign rule. Though his words are gentle, they carry a strange power. The elders of Kanthapura are not sure what to make of him. Some say he is foolish, others say he is blessed. But everyone feels that his arrival marks the beginning of something new. Beyond the village lies the coffee estate, where a white man, the Sahib, rules like a master. The coolies who work there are treated harshly, made to labor under the sun for little pay. They live in huts of mud and straw, beaten and scolded by the overseers. The Sahib represents the far reach of British power, the most villagers have never seen an Englishman. It is through the estate, through taxes, and through unfair landlords that the British presence silently shapes their lives. Achaka ends her introduction with pride and a touch of sadness. Kanthapura, she says, may be small, but it is old and sacred. Every hill and stream has a story, every rock a memory. The goddess Kanchama stands as the soul of their land, blessing them with peace. Yet even as she speaks, we sense the winds of change rising beyond the hills. The calm village, where life moves in cycles of ritual and faith, will soon tremble under the touch of new ideas. The name of Gandhi will echo in its streets, and Morthy's waste will awaken hearts long silent. The chapter closes with the feeling of quiet before the storm. Nothing dramatic has happened yet, but we can sense the world shifting. Kanthapura, the little village that once slept under the gaze of its goddess, is about to become a symbol of India itself, a microcosm of the nation's awakening. Soon, faith will meet politics, devotion will meet rebellion, and the old ways will face the fire of change. For now, Achaka's story remains gentle and nostalgic, a portrait of a world that is about to be transformed forever.
Chapter 2 begins with the quiet stirrings of change in Kanthapura. The village, which has always been wrapped in the calm of tradition, begins to feel the influence of ideas from beyond its hills. The story focuses on Murthy, the young Brahmin who recently returned from the city. Achaka describes him with pride, noting how he has been transformed by his experiences. Unlike the elders, who are bound by rigid customs and fear of the British, Murthy has absorbed new ways of thinking, ideas of equality, justice, and self-respect inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. He carries these principles like a light in his heart, ready to awaken the village. Murthy observes Kanthapura with keen eyes. He sees the poverty of the coolies who work in the coffee estates and the suffering of lower caste families confined to their quarters. He notices the injustice in the treatment of women who have little voice in the village and the blind adherence of people to outdated rituals that often harm rather than help them. Murthy is not angry or impatient, he is quietly determined. He believes that education and non-violent action are the tools to change Kanthapura, and he begins by speaking to those willing to listen. The young man starts gathering small groups of villagers under the shade of the trees. Here he speaks of Gandhi, not as a distant hero, but as a man whose teachings are meant for everyone, rich and poor alike. He talks about satyagraha, the power of truth and non-violent resistance, and urges the villagers to awaken to their own dignity. His words are simple yet profound, and slowly they begin to resonate. Even those who are skeptical cannot help but be drawn to his sincerity and courage. As Murthy begins his quiet campaign, the chapter also highlights the village's social and religious structure, which both helps and hinders his mission. The temple, goddess Kanchemma, and the village elders represent stability and tradition. But these same structures also resist change, fearing the disruption that Murthy's ideas might bring. Achakka narrates these tensions with a sense of inevitability, showing how Kanthapura, while peaceful on the surface, is a place where the seeds of revolution are quietly taking root.
The chapter vividly describes how people react to Murthy's influence. Some, especially the youth, are inspired and curious. They start listening to him, attending meetings, and discussing his teachings in hushed voices. Others, particularly the conservative elders, are wary and anxious. They whisper among themselves, questioning whether these new ideas will bring ruin. Murthy, however, remains patient. He does not seek confrontation. He seeks understanding and gradual change. Chapter 2 also explores the role of women in the village. Achakka tells stories of their resilience and quiet strength. Women like Rangama, Murthy's elder relative, observe and comment on the changes happening in Kanthapura. Though often restricted by tradition, they are the silent supporters of the young reformer. Their experiences add depth to the narrative, highlighting that the struggle for change is not only political, but social and cultural as well. The chapter closes with a sense of anticipation. The village is beginning to shift under Murthy's influence, but the challenges are just starting. The elders' suspicion, the British presence in the estates, and the rigid caste system all threaten to slow the momentum. Yet there is a quiet excitement, a feeling that Kanthapura is about to awaken. Murthy's voice, full of hope and determination, becomes a beacon for those willing to step beyond fear and tradition. The calm of the village, described so vividly in Chapter 1, is now tinged with the first signs of a coming storm of change. Chapter 3 opens with Kanthapura slowly awakening to the presence of new ideas. The village, which has always been content with its quiet, ritual-filled life, now feels a subtle tension. The catalyst is Murthy, whose Gandhian teachings have begun to take root among the youth and the more open-minded villagers. Achakka, our narrator, explains how word spreads from household to household. People begin to gather under the ancient banyan tree, a natural meeting place at the heart of the village, to hear Murthy speak. His presence is magnetic. His voice carries the promise of change without demanding obedience. Murthy teaches the villagers about truth, nonviolence, and self-reliance. He explains how they can resist exploitation not with violence, but through collective action and moral courage. The villagers are fascinated and confused. Many have never considered questioning the power of the landlords or the sahib of the coffee estates. But Murthy's words ignite curiosity and courage. even children and women, who are usually silent observers, start to ask questions. Achaka describes these meetings with warmth, noting how the small groups slowly grow larger as more people come to listen. While some villagers are eager, others are deeply suspicious. The elders and priests, protective of tradition, warn against change. They whisper that Murthy's teachings are dangerous, that the foreign ideas of Gandhi might anger the gods or invite trouble from the British. Achaka portrays these tensions vividly, showing how a single village can contain both hope and fear, courage and caution. The dialogue between the young and old reflects a universal struggle between tradition and reform. The chapter also highlights the role of women in this awakening. Rangama and other women, though restricted by tradition, begin to grasp the significance of Murthy's message. Achaka notes their quiet, steadfast determination, how they begin sharing ideas with one another and encouraging their children to attend the meetings. Women's participation, though subtle at first, adds strength to the movement. Chapter 3 also brings the first practical steps of Gandhian activism. Murthy encourages villagers to stop buying foreign goods, to spin their own cloth, and to live simply and honestly. These small acts of self-discipline may seem minor, but they represent a radical challenge to centuries of dependence and subjugation. Achaka describes these changes with the storyteller's eye, emphasizing how even small acts carry a symbolic power that is soon felt across the village. By the end of the chapter, Kanthapura is no longer entirely the same. The quiet, ordered life described in chapters 1 and 2 is beginning to shift. People are talking, thinking, and imagining a future beyond their inherited routines. Murthy's voice has become a beacon, and the village, once passive and unaware, starts to sense the dawn of a larger struggle. Achaka closes the chapter with a sense of anticipation, hinting that while the movement is still small, it is destined to grow, facing resistance and hardship along the way.
Chapter 4 begins with the first signs of resistance to Murthy's influence in Kanthapura. The village, once peaceful and orderly, is beginning to feel the stirrings of change, and not everyone welcomes it. While the youth and women are inspired by Murthy's teachings, the elders, priests, and landlords view his ideas with suspicion and fear. Achaka, our narrator, describes the tension in the air, the whispered conversations, the cautious glances, and the growing unease among those who are tied deeply to tradition. The villagers are at a crossroads. Should they embrace the new ideas of justice, equality, and nonviolence, or cling to the familiar patterns of caste and ritual? Murthy, however, remains patient and unwavering. He continues to meet the villagers under the banyan tree, spreading Gandhian teachings in a simple, relatable manner. He emphasizes that change must come from self-discipline, moral courage, and collective action. He encourages the villagers to spin their own cloth, boycott foreign goods, and resist the unfair practices of landlords and the British estate overseers through non-violent means. Achaka notes that even small acts such as refusing to buy imported cloth carry enormous symbolic weight. These efforts, while peaceful, begin to unsettle the traditional power structures in the village. The chapter vividly portrays the confrontations between old and new. The elders warn the villagers that Gandhi's ideas are dangerous and that the gods may punish those who question the established social order. They argue that obeying the landlords and British authorities is safer than challenging them. Achaka presents this not as mere opposition, but as a reflection of deep-rooted fear and the protective instinct of those who have lived by the old ways all their lives. Women play an increasingly important role in this chapter. Rangama and other women, inspired by Murthy's teachings, begin quietly organizing and educating themselves. They encourage their children and other women to listen, learn, and act. Achaka highlights the strength and courage of women, showing that social change is not only the work of men like Murthy, but also relies on the hidden labor and resilience of women in the village. The chapter also introduces the first signs of tension with the British influence. While the Sahib himself is rarely seen, his presence is felt through oppressive estate policies and the harsh treatment of laborers. The villagers begin to discuss these injustices more openly, connecting Murthy's ideas to their own lived experiences of exploitation. Achakka's storytelling captures the emotional and moral awakening of Kanthapura as villagers slowly recognize that change is necessary and possible, even if it comes with risk. By the end of chapter 4, the village is on the brink of transformation. Murthy's movement has grown, but so has the opposition. The tension between tradition and reform, fear and courage, old hierarchies and new ideals sets the stage for the challenges and conflicts that will follow. Achakka closes the chapter with a sense of anticipation and inevitability, signaling that the quiet life of Kanthapura is about to be dramatically altered by the winds of change. Chapter 5 opens with the gradual spread of Murthy's influence across Kanthapura. The village, once hesitant and cautious, is beginning to awaken. More people, especially the youth, gather under the banyan tree to hear Murthy speak. They listen intently as he explains the principles of Gandhian nonviolence, truth, and self-reliance. Achakka, the narrator, emphasizes how Murthy's calm and sincere voice inspires courage in the villagers, encouraging them to think critically about the oppressive systems that have long controlled their lives. In this chapter, the role of women becomes more prominent. Rangamma and other village women quietly organize themselves, supporting Murthy's teachings in ways that were previously unimaginable in a traditional society. They educate their children, discuss ideas among themselves, and provide moral support to the youth. Achakka portrays these women as the silent backbone of the movement, their efforts as vital as the speeches and meetings conducted by Murthy. Their courage, quiet yet powerful, signals the beginning of a broader social transformation within the village. The chapter also highlights the challenge posed by the older generation and conservative elders. Many elders continue to resist Murthy's teachings, warning that questioning tradition and authority could anger the gods or bring misfortune. They fear the disruption of the social order, particularly the established caste system. Despite these warnings, the younger villagers, motivated by Murthy's example, begin small acts of defiance, boycotting foreign goods, spinning their own cloth, and questioning unfair practices in the village. Achakka portrays this tension vividly, showing the struggle between tradition and progress that forms the heart of Kanthapura's awakening.
Chapter 6 begins with Kanthapura experiencing the first real tensions between the villagers and the entrenched powers, the landlords and the British authorities overseeing the coffee estates. Achakka, our narrator, describes how the village, which had been awakening to Murthy's teachings, now faces tangible obstacles. The Sahib of the estates and his overseers exploit laborers, taking advantage of their ignorance and poverty. Murthy encourages the villagers to recognize these injustices and to resist them, not with violence, but through peaceful non-cooperation and moral courage. Chapter 6 highlights how Murthy's influence begins to challenge traditional hierarchies. Elders and priests, previously cautious, now feel increasingly uneasy. The social order, rigid for centuries, is beginning to show cracks. Achakka narrates the subtle but significant acts of rebellion. Villagers refusing to perform menial services for the landlords, women organizing community activities independent of male authority, and youth openly discussing ideas of equality and justice. These small acts, though seemingly minor, symbolize a growing spirit of independence within the village. Women continue to play a pivotal role. Rangamma and others guide children, support meetings, and even mediate disputes among villagers, showing courage and intelligence. Achakka portrays them as the hidden force sustaining the movement, their resilience silently amplifying Murthy's message. Their active participation also challenges traditional gender roles, suggesting that true social reform must include women's voices. Conflict begins to take a more defined shape in this chapter. The landlords and estate overseers feel threatened by the villagers' newfound assertiveness. Achakka describes tense encounters. verbal confrontations, subtle intimidation, and warnings meant to frighten villagers into submission. Murthy, however, stands firm. He advises patience, perseverance, and nonviolence, teaching that true resistance requires moral strength as well as courage. Chapter 6 also explores the villagers' internal struggles. Many are torn between fear of retaliation and the desire for justice. Achaka emphasizes that change is never easy. It demands sacrifice and endurance. The village begins to realize that their actions, though small, have far-reaching implications. The oppression they face is not limited to Kanthapura. It mirrors the larger struggle for freedom across India. By the end of chapter 6, Kanthapura is no longer just a quiet, sleepy village. It has become a site of awakening and preparation. Murthy's teachings have taken root, women and youth are actively involved, and the elders and landlords are visibly anxious. Achaka closes the chapter with a sense of anticipation, suggesting that the village is moving steadily towards larger, unavoidable confrontations, where courage, unity, and moral conviction will be tested like never before.
Chapter 7 opens with Kanthapura fully stirring under the influence of Murthy and Gandhian ideas. The village, which had begun to question tradition and injustice in earlier chapters, now sees the beginnings of organized action. Achakka, our narrator, describes how the youth, inspired by Murthy, gather in groups to discuss strategy, teaching each other the importance of nonviolence, truth, and self-reliance. Women continue to play a critical role, quietly yet decisively supporting the efforts, encouraging participation, and maintaining the moral backbone of the movement. Murthy urges the villagers to practice self-discipline and boycott foreign goods. They spin their own cloth, refuse to cooperate with exploitative landlords, and avoid participating in rituals that reinforce unjust hierarchies. Achakka paints these acts vividly, showing how even small gestures, like a refusal to serve a landlord or a decision to wear hand-spun cloth, carry symbolic and practical weight. Through these measures, the villagers begin to experience a sense of empowerment they had never known before. The chapter also portrays the first real confrontations with the authorities. Landlords and estate overseers grow anxious as villagers start refusing to obey traditional demands. Achakka narrates subtle acts of intimidation, overseers verbally threatening the villagers, landlords attempting to sway elders against Murthy, and attempts to isolate the youth from the movement. But Murthy, calm and steadfast, reminds the villagers that true courage is rooted in non-violence and moral resolve. Achakka emphasizes how the village begins to transform socially and morally. The youth, once passive, now speak up. Women, once invisible in the public sphere, now exert quiet influence, and even some conservative villagers begin to question old practices. The narrative highlights that change is not only political, but deeply cultural, touching every household, every family, and every interaction. By the end of chapter 7, Kanthapura has moved from quiet awakening to active participation. The village's Gandhian movement is gaining momentum. There is a sense of collective energy, moral purpose, and cautious optimism. Achakka's narration captures the excitement, tension, and anticipation. While the villagers are still learning and testing their courage, they are stepping onto a path that will soon challenge tradition, authority, and oppression in ways that cannot be ignored. Chapter 8 begins with Kanthapura experiencing the first direct consequences of its Gandhian activities. The villagers, emboldened by Murthy's teachings, are no longer passive observers. They actively challenge injustice through non-violent resistance and moral courage. Achakka, the narrator, describes how the landlords and estate overseers, threatened by this newfound assertiveness, begin to respond with hostility. Subtle intimidation escalates into more concrete threats. Villagers are warned against participating in meetings, their goods are boycotted by powerful traders, and some are even threatened with punishment or eviction. The chapter focuses on how the village unites under pressure. Despite fear, the youth and women stand firm, demonstrating remarkable resilience. Rangamma and other women continue to provide vital support, not only encouraging participation, but also mediating disputes, comforting the frightened, and teaching children the values of courage and truth. Achakka emphasizes the moral strength of women, portraying them as the unseen pillars of Kanthapura's movement. The narrative also highlights the villagers' internal struggles. Fear, doubt, and hesitation surface as threats from landlords and British officials intensify. Achakka describes moments of uncertainty, where some villagers question whether their efforts are worth the risk. Yet, Murthy's calm guidance and unwavering commitment to non-violence and truth inspire the people to persevere. Small acts, such as refusing to provide services to exploitative landlords, begin to ripple across the village, signaling the power of collective action. Chapter 8 also explores the ethical and spiritual dimensions of the struggle. Achakka narrates how villagers draw strength from faith in Kinchamma, their goddess, and from the moral righteousness of Gandhi's teachings. Even in hardship, the belief in justice and ethical action sustains them. The village begins to understand that true courage is not only in action, but in enduring suffering without resentment or violence. By the end of chapter 8, Kanthapura has transformed into a village of quiet yet steadfast resistance. The movement is no longer just about ideas, it is about lived experience, sacrifice, and courage. Achakka closes the chapter with a sense of tension and anticipation, foreshadowing the further trials the village will face as its Gandhian activism grows and attracts greater opposition from landlords, traditionalists, and British authorities alike.
Chapter 9 begins with Kanthapura facing the full weight of its moral and social awakening. By now, Murthy's Gandhian movement has grown beyond casual gatherings under the banyan tree. The villagers, inspired by nonviolence and truth, are actively resisting oppression from the landlords, estate overseers, and conservative elders. Achakka narrates the rising tension with the storyteller's keen eye, showing how a once peaceful village now feels charged with a mix of courage, fear, and anticipation. The chapter focuses on the ethical dilemmas faced by the villagers. Many struggle with fear of retaliation. Some elders worry that defying the landlords or the British will invite ruin, while the youth fear punishment, fines, or even imprisonment. Achakka portrays these conflicts vividly, describing whispered debates in households, anxious glances on village streets, and silent prayers to Kenchama, the protective goddess. Yet the moral clarity of Murthy's teachings offers guidance. He reminds the villagers that true courage is rooted in truth, nonviolence, and faith, and that enduring hardship without resentment is itself a form of victory. Sacrifices become an important theme in this chapter. Villagers begin refusing to provide labor for landlords, spinning their own cloth instead of buying foreign goods, and boycotting unfair markets. Achakka emphasizes the costs of these small yet profound acts. Families go hungry at times. Social relations are strained, and even friendships are tested. Rangama and other women quietly bear the brunt of this struggle, supporting their families while sustaining the movement. Their resilience, patience, and cleverness become a lifeline for Kanthapura, showing that social change depends on the courage of ordinary individuals as much as on leaders like Murthy. The chapter also depicts direct confrontations with oppressive forces. Landlords, threatened by the growing unity of the village, attempt to intimidate families through fines, threats, and ostracism. Overseers at the estates target working-class villagers who refuse to comply with exploitative rules. Achakka narrates these episodes with suspense, highlighting the tension between fear and moral resolve. Villagers who once obeyed without question now stand firm, demonstrating that courage and conviction can ripple through even the most fearful hearts. Another key focus of Chapter 9 is the spiritual and emotional dimension of the struggle. Achakka shows how faith in Chinchama and adherence to Gandhian principles provide inner strength. Prayer, meditation, and storytelling reinforce the villagers' commitment to justice and nonviolence. They learn that courage is not merely physical, but deeply ethical, a readiness to endure suffering for a greater good. Achakka's narrative often pauses to reflect on the poetic beauty of resistance, describing the village at dawn, the soft rustle of leaves, and the quiet determination of people as they face hardship with dignity. By the end of Chapter 9, Kanthapura has become a village transformed. The villagers have endured their first real tests of courage and unity. The movement is no longer abstract. It is lived in every household, every street, and every heart. Murthy's teachings have taken root, yet the story foreshadows that even greater trials are coming. Trials that will require sacrifice, resilience, and unwavering faith. Achaka closes the chapter with a sense of anticipation and gravity, signaling that Kanthapura is moving toward a climax where moral conviction and collective courage will be tested like never before.
Chapter 10 begins with Kanthapura in the midst of a full-fledged Gandhian struggle. The village, once quiet and hesitant, is now alive with purpose and collective energy. Achaka, our narrator, paints a vivid picture of villagers working together in non-violent defiance. Spinning their own cloth, boycotting foreign goods, refusing to serve exploitative landlords, and standing united despite threats. The youth move with quiet determination, women like Hangamma coordinate support and logistics, and Multi continues to guide everyone with calm authority and moral conviction. This chapter emphasizes the interplay of victories and setbacks. Small successes, like villagers refusing to pay unfair taxes or spinning sufficient cloth to replace imports, give hope and strengthen morale. Achakka describes these achievements with pride, showing how ordinary acts of courage ripple outward, encouraging even hesitant villagers to join the movement. At the same time, setbacks and challenges test their resolve. Landlords retaliate with threats and fines. British overseers attempt to undermine unity by targeting families, and some conservative elders still resist change, sowing doubt. Yet the villagers persist, learning that struggle requires both patience and perseverance. The chapter also delves into the human dimension of resistance. Achakka narrates how families endure hardship quietly. Women shoulder burdens silently, and children observe and learn the meaning of courage. The spiritual dimension remains strong. Prayer to Kenchamma and adherence to Gandhian principles sustain morale. Achakka's storytelling beautifully captures the poetic rhythm of village life in struggle. How daily chores, communal gatherings, and small acts of resistance weave together into a tapestry of moral and social awakening. A critical aspect of Chapter 10 is the deepening unity among the villagers. Despite fear, setbacks, or physical or emotional hardship, the people of Kanthapura begin to see themselves not as isolated individuals but as a community bound by justice, non-violence, and shared purpose. Achakka emphasizes that this unity is the village's greatest strength. For the movement's power does not come solely from Murti, but from the collective courage, faith, and perseverance of every man, woman, and child. By the end of Chapter 10, Kanthapura is at the peak of its moral and social awakening, poised between triumph and further trials. Achakka closes the chapter with a sense of intense anticipation, hinting that while the village has achieved remarkable solidarity and progress, the next challenges will test the depth of their courage, the resilience of their unity, and the endurance of their ethical principles. The chapter leaves listeners with the feeling that the struggle of Kanthapura is both a microcosm of India's independence movement and a timeless story of human courage, conviction, and collective awakening.
Chapter 11 begins with Kanthapura standing at the climax of its Gandhian struggle. The village, once peaceful and quiet, is now alive with action, courage, and unwavering resolve. Acheka, the narrator, describes the village streets and lanes buzzing with activity, youths organizing boycotts, women coordinating support, and villagers collectively refusing to cooperate with landlords and the British estate overseers. The spirit of nonviolence and moral courage is tangible, and even amidst threats, the villagers' determination shines. The chapter emphasizes sacrifice and endurance. Families endure hardships, food shortages, economic pressure, and social ostracism, but they persist, motivated by the principles Murthy teaches. Acheka describes the quiet heroism of women like Rangama, who balance domestic duties with participation in the movement, ensuring children are cared for and the village remains united. Their courage is often unseen but crucial to the movement's success. Direct confrontations with authority intensify in this chapter. Landlords and estate overseers, alarmed by the village's growing unity, attempt stronger retaliation. Acheka narrates tense scenes, verbal threats, attempts to divide families, and intimidation of those who actively resist. Yet the villagers stand firm. Even those initially hesitant begin to realize the moral and social necessity of their struggle. The chapter portrays how courage spreads not through orders, but through shared conviction and example. Chapter 11 also explores the ethical dilemmas faced by Morthy and the villagers. Some question whether their sacrifices will ever yield tangible results. Others wrestle with fear, wondering if the cost of nonviolent resistance is too high. Acheka's narration emphasizes that these dilemmas are an essential part of any meaningful struggle. True courage, she suggests, is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act rightly despite it. The narrative highlights the spiritual dimension of the struggle. Villagers continue to seek strength from Kanchama, their goddess, and from the teachings of Gandhi. Prayer, devotion, and moral reflection sustain them as they face trials that are both physical and emotional. Acheka's storytelling captures these moments poetically, showing that resistance is not merely political, it is ethical, spiritual, and deeply human. By the end of chapter 11, Kanthapura has faced the most intense phase of the struggle yet. The village has endured hardships, experienced moments of doubt, and made significant sacrifices, but it remains united, morally resolute, and inspired by Morthy's guidance. Acheka closes the chapter with a sense of tension and expectation, signaling that while the immediate confrontations are reaching their height, the story is approaching its resolution, one that will leave a lasting mark on the village, its people, and the spirit of their Gandhian awakening.
Chapter 12 opens with Kanthapura recovering from the intense trials of its Gandhian struggle. The village, once quiet and unassuming, has been transformed by months of moral courage, nonviolent resistance, and collective awakening. Acheka, our narrator, reflects on how far the village has come. The youth, women, and elders alike have been changed by Morthy's teachings, by their own courage, and by the sacrifices they have made. The streets and homes, though still humble, now carry a spirit of hope, dignity, and resilience. The chapter emphasizes reflection and moral growth. Acheka narrates how villagers discuss and understand the meaning of the struggles they endured. They recognize that while they have faced hardships, economic pressure, intimidation, social isolation, their unity and adherence to principles of truth and nonviolence have strengthened them. Spiritual faith, particularly devotion to Kanchama, continues to provide inner strength, helping villagers reconcile the challenges they faced with the justice they sought. Morthy's role in the village is now fully established. Though he remains humble, his teachings have deeply influenced Kanthapura's identity. Acheka observes that the villagers no longer see him merely as a young reformer from the city, but as a moral guide whose vision has awakened the conscience of the entire community. Women like Rangama, who once operated in the shadows of tradition, now hold a visible moral authority, showing how the movement has altered social dynamics and empowered those previously marginalized. The narrative also highlights the lasting impact of small acts of resistance. The villagers have learned that courage and ethical action are cumulative. Spinning their own cloth, boycotting unfair systems, and enduring hardship without violence have created a profound sense of self-respect and agency. Acheka emphasizes that even in a remote village like Kanthapura, ordinary people can participate in shaping a just and morally conscious society. By the end of chapter 12, Kanthapura has achieved a moral and spiritual victory, if not all external challenges are resolved. Acheka closes the story with a sense of calm optimism and reflection, describing the village at dawn, serene yet transformed. The trials, sacrifices, and struggles of the villagers have left a lasting imprint.
Kanthapura is no longer just a geographical location, it has become a symbol of collective courage, ethical awakening, and the enduring power of nonviolence. The novel ends on a quiet note of triumph, suggesting that true change is not always immediate or dramatic, but it is lasting when rooted in truth, unity, and moral conviction. The title Kanthapura holds deep symbolic and thematic meaning, representing not just a physical village, but the soul of India itself during the struggle for independence. At first glance, Kanthapura appears to be an ordinary South Indian village, but Raja Rao transforms it into a microcosm of the entire nation, where social, political, and spiritual awakening unfold side by side. The village becomes a living symbol of India's transformation under the influence of Gandhian philosophy, as its people learn to unite beyond caste, gender, and class divisions. By naming the novel after the village, Raja Rao emphasizes that the heart of India's freedom movement lies not in cities or political centers, but in the smallest, most remote corners of the land, where ordinary people rise with extraordinary courage. The title also reflects the collective spirit of the narrative. There is no single hero, for the entire village becomes the protagonist. Through Achika's voice, the village speaks, dreams, suffers, and awakens, embodying the idea that India's true strength lies in its unity and shared moral conscience. Thus, the title Kanthapura perfectly captures the novel's essence, a story of a village that mirrors the awakening of a nation, blending myth, history, and human resilience into one timeless narrative. When studying Kanthapura, students should look beyond its political message and see how Raja Rao transforms a simple village story into a microcosm of India's freedom struggle. The novel isn't just about one village, it symbolically represents the awakening of an entire nation. Rao shows how India's independence movement was not limited to cities or leaders like Gandhi, but lived in the hearts of ordinary villagers. Students should also notice the oral narrative style. The story is told by Achika, an elderly woman whose voice reflects traditional storytelling. This technique connects the reader to Indian culture, folklore, and spirituality, making the political struggle feel personal and emotional. Another key point for students is to observe how faith and politics intertwine in the novel. The blending of myth and reality, where Gandhi is compared to divine figures and the freedom movement is seen as a spiritual duty, shows how religion and patriotism shape the Indian consciousness. Finally, students can reflect on how Kanthapura remains relevant today. It encourages us to question injustice peacefully, to respect unity in diversity, and to believe in the power of moral conviction. Understanding this book helps us appreciate how literature can shape national identity and social change. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of Kanthapura by Raja Rao, a novel that is not just a story about a small South Indian village, but a reflection of India's awakening soul. Through Morthy's journey and the villager's courage, we witness how truth, unity, and nonviolence can transform even the most remote corners of a nation. Raja Rao reminds us that revolutions don't always begin in grand palaces or among powerful leaders. Sometimes they start in the hearts of ordinary people who choose to stand up for what is right. His storytelling merges myth with history, faith with freedom, and personal struggle with collective destiny. For students and readers alike, Kanthapura is more than a novel. It's a voice of hope, resilience, and moral strength. It teaches us that change begins with conviction and that every act of courage, however small, becomes part of a greater movement. Thank you for joining me on Literary Lens. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Kanthapura, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more literary discussions that open new windows into the world of words. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep seeing the world through your literary lens.